Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Sharon and Nick got into an argument in bed, and Phyllis spoils the moment. Spoilers for The Young and the Restless suggest that Sharon Newman, played by Sharon Case, and Nick Newman, played by Joshua Morrow, might be caught in bed together. When the time comes, will Michelle Stafford's Phyllis Summers ruin the moment? Sharon has waited a long time to fall in love with Nick again, but after he started a kiss on the train in Nice, she has a little hope. Nick forced Sharon to get closer to him and planted one on her after Sharon helped him through his painful experience. Obviously, Nick hasn't committed anything, and when Sharon tried to talk about that kiss when they got home, he was pretty casual. Although Nick was willing to talk about the smooch if Sharon wanted, he ultimately suggested they should just wait and see if it happened again. Despite this, it can't be denied that it was a significant shift for Nick to kiss Sharon after all of his efforts to keep her in the friend zone. This may indicate that another lip lock will occur at some point. In fact, if Sharon and Nick get back together in bed, they might take things to the next level. Considering all their history and the lingering spark between them, it wouldn't be surprising for Nick and Sharon to hit the sheets. Naturally, this could present an excellent opportunity for someone to appear and take notice. Interruptions happen often on daytime dramas, so we should consider who might wreck Sharon and Nick's attempt to sizzle. Y&R spoilers indicate that Nick and Sharon still face challenges, and Phyllis may be one of those challenges. What would happen if Sharon and Nick jumped at the chance to rent a suite at the GCAC, only for Phyllis to sneak up on them in a soap opera? On the other hand, it might take place at Sharon's cottage if Phyllis sneaks in on some sofa sex instead. Nick and Sharon's hot night might even be deliberately sabotaged if Phyllis finds out what's going on. In the aftermath, Sharon could at least accuse Phyllis and rekindle their rivalry. According to The Young and the Restless spoilers, Sharon may not receive the happy reunion news she has been anticipating. Therefore, keep an eye out for updates regarding any impending relationship obstacles. It was supposed to be a turning point. The night Sharon had waited for far too long. The night Nick would finally stop pretending they were just good friends navigating heartbreak together. They'd been orbiting each other for months like gravitational bodies caught in some painful emotional limbo. Ever since that surprise kiss on the train in Nice, Sharon had dared to believe that maybe just maybe their story wasn't over. She'd tried to keep her hopes at bay, tried to be pragmatic about the whole thing, but every time Nick brushed her hand, every time he looked at her with that old warmth in his eyes, her heart betrayed her. She wasn't over him, not by a long shot. And now, here they were entangled in bed, the sheets a chaotic mess of raw passion and lingering history, their breathing uneven, hearts thudding, limbs tangled beneath the dim glow of her bedroom light. But just as the moment became tender, with Nick brushing a loose curl from her cheek and whispering something that almost sounded like "I missed this," something cracked. Sharon, ever the introspective one, hesitated. "Is this real, Nick? Or are we just lost in old habits?" she asked softly, her voice laced with cautious hope. Nick stiffened beside her, the air shifting. He turned away slightly, dragging a hand through his hair. "Sharon, can't we just enjoy what's happening? Does everything need to be labeled right now?" That simple sentence hit her like a slap. Her stomach tightened. "So you're saying it meant nothing?" she countered, sitting up and pulling the sheet tightly to her chest. "I didn't say that," Nick muttered, visibly annoyed. "But I also didn't say I was ready to make some grand declaration about us getting back together." Sharon looked away, heart sinking. "Then what was the kiss on the train? What was this?" she gestured between them. "Comfort sex? A nostalgia trip?" Nick groaned, throwing the pillow aside and rising from the bed. "Sharon, don't turn this into some moral analysis. We're both adults. We were in the moment. You kissed me. You pulled me close. You said you missed this." "I did. I do," he admitted, frustrated. "But I don't want to jump into something just because we had a good night. That's all I'm saying." That's when the door creaked open, and the storm they didn't expect walked in. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Phyllis Summers announced, arms crossed, her voice thick with sarcasm and smug amusement. Both Sharon and Nick froze. Sharon clutched the sheet tighter. Nick scrambled for his jeans on the floor. "Phyllis, what the hell are you doing here?" Nick barked, pulling on a t-shirt. "Oh, Don't worry. I didn't see anything I haven't seen before, she replied with a wicked smirk, her eyes darting to Sharon with venomous precision. You left your briefcase at Crimson Lights, and I figured I'd drop it off, but clearly I should have knocked, or just let you enjoy your little trip down memory lane. Sharon glared. You had no right to just walk in. And don't pretend you didn't come here to snoop. What can I say? Curiosity is a curse, Phyllis shrugged, but the daggers in her gaze suggested this wasn't just some coincidental drop-in. I figured you might be licking your wounds after our last conversation, but wow, this is rich. Nick stepped between them, jaw clenched. Enough. This isn't your business, Phyllis. Isn't it? She shot back. You and I just talked 2 days ago about how you're not looking to dive into anything serious again. Now I walk in on you playing house with Sharon. Sharon's eyebrows shot up. You talked to her about us. There is no us, remember? Nick snapped, regretting it instantly when Sharon's expression fell. Sharon, I didn't. No, it's fine, she interrupted coldly. I get it now. Phyllis smirked like a cat who'd cornered a canary. Glad I could clear things up. But Sharon wasn't done. Standing tall, wrapped in her dignity as much as the sheet, she turned her fury on Phyllis. You've always hated that Nick and I shared something deeper than anything you two ever had. You can't stand it, so you sabotage it. Please. Phyllis rolled her eyes. Don't flatter yourself. I'm just trying to prevent Nick from making another mistake he'll regret in the morning. That's rich coming from the Queen of Regrets, Sharon fired back. You don't care about Nick's happiness. You care about control. You don't want him, but you don't want anyone else to have him either. Ladies! Nick shouted, throwing his arms in the air. This is ridiculous. Phyllis, leave. Now. Gladly, she said, walking toward the door, then turned with a final jab. But maybe next time, pick a woman who doesn't need a therapist every time you blink the wrong way. With that, she was gone. The door slammed. The silence in her wake was deafening. Sharon turned her back on Nick, stepping into the bathroom without another word. Nick sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. The spell had been broken, the intimacy shattered, not just by Phyllis' intrusion but by the raw truth that had surfaced. Sharon wanted a future. Nick wanted a pause. Phyllis wanted chaos. And tonight, all three collided. When Sharon emerged moments later in a robe, Nick stood. Sharon, I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't hurt me, Nick, she said evenly. You reminded me that I've outgrown this. I deserve someone who wants me without hesitation. Nick flinched. I do want you. Not enough, she whispered. And with that, she opened the door for him to leave. The moment they had passionate, messy, familiar was over. What was supposed to be a rekindling became a reckoning. And in true Young and the Restless fashion, love once again slipped through their fingers, just as Phyllis planned. But if Sharon had anything to say about it, this wasn't the end. This was just another painful chapter in a never-ending story, and she was determined to rewrite the ending. Because while Phyllis might have spoiled the night, Sharon wasn't about to let her spoil her future. Nick left the cottage that night feeling more conflicted than ever. The cold night air hit him like a wave of guilt, sobering him as he replayed every second of that heated bedroom confrontation. He hadn't planned to end up in bed with Sharon. Well, maybe part of him had wanted it, but he had thought it would just be a brief reconnect, a moment of comfort between two people with decades of complicated history. But seeing her devastated eyes as she shut the door on him made it crystal clear. Sharon had hoped for more. And maybe, deep down, so had he. But now, any hope had been poisoned by Phyllis's perfectly timed invasion, by his own fear of commitment, and by years of unresolved wounds they both carried. Back at his place, Nick poured himself a drink, but even the familiar burn of whiskey couldn't drown the regret swimming in his gut. He knew Sharon deserved clarity, not some casual shrug about what might happen next. What had he been thinking, playing coy with someone as emotionally intelligent as Sharon? She wasn't a fling. She was his past, present, and, if he didn't ruin everything, maybe even his future. Meanwhile, across town, Phyllis was basking in the afterglow of her sabotage. In her suite at the Grand Phoenix, she swirled a glass of champagne, smirking to herself. Sure, she'd technically been returning Nick's briefcase, but the truth was, She'd already heard whispers that Sharon and Nick were getting close again. A little eavesdropping at Crimson Lights and a conveniently timed accidental sighting had told her all she needed to know. Something was brewing between them. And she couldn't allow that. Not because she wanted Nick back, but because she hated being excluded from his emotional center. As long as Sharon was in the picture, Phyllis always felt like a secondary character in her own story. And Phyllis Summers had never been comfortable in the background. The next morning, Sharon sat at the edge of her bed, the silence of the cottage pressing down on her. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nick's conflicted face, heard Phyllis's smug remarks, and felt that unbearable hollowness creeping in. She had allowed herself to believe again, to hope for a future she'd once thought was long dead. And for a brief, shining moment, it had felt like they were back, like the world had reset itself to some older, purer version where Nick looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. But now, that illusion had been shattered. Again. Still, Sharon Newman wasn't the same woman who crumbled every time love disappointed her. She had survived worse. Cancer. Mental illness. The loss of Cassie. And yes, Nick's betrayals. She was tired of being someone men loved only when it was convenient. Tired of being the emotional safety net. Tired of people assuming she would always forgive, always wait, always understand. By midday, she was fully dressed, hair pulled back with purpose, and at Crimson Lights running things like nothing had happened. But those who knew her, Mariah, Faith, even Chelsea, could see something was brewing beneath the surface. The calm before another inevitable Sharon storm. "Mom, are you okay?" Faith asked gently when she popped in for a coffee break. Sharon offered her a small smile. "I'm just fine. I promise. Just tired." Did something happen with Nick? Faith wasn't oblivious. She'd seen how close they'd gotten again lately: movie nights, long conversations, more eye contact than usual. Sharon hesitated, then sighed. "We had a moment. Then we had a conversation. Then Phyllis happened." Faith winced. "Yikes. Want me to slash her tires?" Sharon laughed despite herself. "No, honey. That's illegal. But tempting." Across town, Phyllis had wasted no time capitalizing on the drama she'd ignited. She showed up at Nick's office with a knowing look and 2 coffees, her way of saying, "See, I'm the one who gets you." "Don't," Nick said immediately, not even looking up. "Don't what?" she replied innocently, placing the coffee on his desk. "Don't act like you're the supportive ex just dropping off caffeine. You came to Sharon's cottage last night on purpose." Phyllis scoffed, though a flicker of satisfaction glimmered in her eyes. "I brought your briefcase. You let yourself in without knocking." "I figured I was doing you a favor," she said, now defensive. "You said you didn't want anything serious. I just reminded you of that." Nick stood up, eyes blazing. "You humiliated Sharon. You crossed a line." "Oh please." Phyllis rolled her eyes. "She's a big girl. She knows exactly how this town works. She deserves better than being blindsided by your jealousy." That word hit a nerve. Jealousy? Really? Phyllis's smile dropped. "You think I'm jealous of Sharon? Aren't you?" he challenged. "Because I think maybe you don't want me, but you don't want me happy with her either." Phyllis stared at him, the words cutting deeper than she expected. "That's not true," she said quietly. "Then what is?" he demanded. She didn't answer. Because for the first time in a long time, Phyllis wasn't sure she knew. That night, Sharon sat on her porch, watching the stars, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. It was a quiet moment, one she used to share with Nick often in years past. The sound of his laughter, the way he used to hold her hand when he thought she wasn't paying attention, all of it echoed in her mind. She thought about calling him, about giving him one more chance to say what she wanted to hear. But then she realized she didn't need Nick to define her worth. She didn't need another conversation where she had to convince someone to choose her. So she didn't call. The next morning, Sharon stopped by Newman Enterprises unannounced. Victoria looked up from her desk, surprised. "Sharon, what brings you here?" "I need a favor," Sharon said with quiet resolve. "I want to expand my mental health outreach. The wellness center. I want to go statewide. Maybe even national. I've been playing small for too long." Victoria blinked. Wow. That's ambitious. It's overdue, Sharon replied. And I think your family's foundation could help me do it. You're serious? Dead serious. Then let's talk, Victoria said, already intrigued. As Sharon walked out of the building an hour later, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, empowerment. She didn't need a man in her bed to feel worthy. She didn't need Nick's indecision or Phyllis's cruelty to remind her of her past. She had the power to write her future. But across the street, watching her from the cafe window, was Phyllis. She'd followed Sharon there out of curiosity or paranoia, and the look on her face now wasn't smug. It was unsettled. She'd expected Sharon to fall apart, to cry into lattes and look pathetic. But instead, Sharon was rising, powerful and poised, leaving Phyllis with the realization that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't broken anything. Maybe she'd just lit a fire under someone who was finally done being played. And then there was Nick, caught between two women again, one manipulating his choices, the other walking away with dignity. But unlike the last dozen times this happened, something was different. Nick didn't feel like the prize anymore. He felt like the one left behind. He visited Sharon one last time, days later, standing on her porch in the soft glow of dusk. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. For not being honest. For letting Phyllis get between us. Sharon gave him a sad smile. You don't owe me anything, Nick. We both played a part. But I think we've reached the end of our road. Don't say that, he whispered. Maybe we just need more time. We've had years, she said gently. And I've finally realized I deserve more than maybes. Nick nodded, swallowing hard. So that's it. For now, she replied. But who knows? Maybe someday, we'll find our way back for real. No games. No ghosts. He smiled faintly. You'll always be important to me. And you to me, she agreed. But sometimes love isn't enough. As he walked away, Sharon felt no regret, no doubt. The chapter had closed not in bitterness, but in growth. And as she turned back toward the house, she allowed herself one quiet, powerful thought. This time, I choose me. The days that followed moved slowly, but Sharon felt strangely at peace. For once, she wasn't spiraling or second-guessing herself. She threw herself into work, expanding her wellness center's services and finalizing plans with Victoria for a pilot program that would reach underserved communities. She spent more time with Mariah, Faith, and even Chelsea, women who reminded her she didn't need romantic validation to feel fulfilled. But Genoa City is a town where nothing stays still for long, and the fallout from that infamous night still echoed through whispers and side glances at crimson lights. Everyone had their theories. Of course, some thought Sharon and Nick were secretly back together. Others assumed Phyllis and Nick were rekindling old flames again. Sharon heard it all and said nothing, choosing silence over drama. Phyllis, however, was growing increasingly restless. She'd expected Sharon to grovel, to lash out, to throw a tantrum in public. But the calm, composed version of Sharon that emerged after the confrontation gnawed at her. And when she saw Nick a few days later at society, looking distracted and regretful, it only irritated her more. You look like you lost something important, she teased as she slid into the bar stool beside him. Or maybe someone. Nick didn't even bother with a fake smile. You know, Phyllis, sometimes I wonder if you enjoy the destruction or just the aftermath. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired. Tired of all this toxicity. You blowing things up just to see what burns. Me trying to keep the peace between you and Sharon like it's some eternal game of emotional ping-pong. I'm done. Phyllis's smirk faltered. She hadn't anticipated that. So what now? You just fade off into moral purity and sadness. No, he said. I move on. And maybe I finally figure out who I am without you, or Sharon deciding for me. Phyllis sat back, wounded pride giving way to something more vulnerable. She hated being the villain in Nick's eyes, hated being seen as the one who destroyed love, not the one who was just afraid of being left behind. But that was the story she'd written for herself, over and over. And now it was starting to close in on her. Later that night, she stood alone in her suite, looking at an old picture of her, Nick, and Summer. The three of them, laughing back when things felt whole. She poured herself a drink but didn't take a sip. For the first time in ages, She didn't feel like celebrating her victory, because maybe it hadn't been a win at all. Maybe, just maybe, she'd lost more than she bargained for. And as Sharon stood outside her wellness center the next morning, coffee in hand, looking out at the city she loved and the life she was finally building on her own terms, she smiled. Not for Nick. Not for revenge. But because she had finally stepped out of the endless triangle. And now, the future was hers to write. No more interruptions.